The lawyer cleared his throat for the third time before anyone noticed I hadn't signed anything. My mother slid a pen toward me across the polished oak table. "Just initial here, Claire," she said gently. "It's routine." Routine. That word echoed strangely in the quiet office. Outside the window, rain tapped against the glass in steady, patient rhythms. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old paper and coffee that had been sitting too long. My brother Jason leaned back comfortably in his chair, arms crossed, already smiling like the meeting was finished. The estate attorney avoided my eyes. That was the first thing that felt wrong. I looked down at the document again. Estate liquidation acknowledgement. Liquidation, my stomach tightened. "I thought Grandpa left the ranch," I said slowly. "Why does this say it's already been sold?" Silence, not shocked silence, prepared silence. My father spoke first. "It was easier this way," he said calmly. "Maintenance costs were too high." My mother added quickly, "You'll still receive your portion. We handled everything for you." Handled everything, without telling me. Jason chuckled lightly. "You were busy with work anyway. We saved you the stress." I felt heat rise behind my eyes, but something deeper stopped me from reacting, because no one looked guilty. They looked relieved, like they expected me to sign and leave. And that's when I realized the decisions had already been made. I was just there to make them legal. 3 things didn't make sense. First, Grandpa loved that land more than anything. He'd refused million-dollar offers while alive. Second, the paperwork said the property sold 2 months earlier. 2 months before I was even notified about the will reading. And third, my name barely appeared in the distribution summary. Jason received investment transfers. My parents received property proceeds. I received a modest cash settlement. It wasn't nothing, but it wasn't equal. And Grandpa never did anything halfway. So why did everyone look nervous when I started reading carefully? Why did the lawyer keep checking my father before answering questions? And why did my brother avoid looking at me entirely? Something was missing. I just didn't know what yet. Before I go further, I want to ask you something. Have you ever sat in a room where everyone else seemed to know something, and you were the only one catching up? Tell me where you're watching from tonight, and what time is it? If you enjoy real emotional storytelling, the kind that unfolds piece by piece, please subscribe the channel and like the video. Because this story didn't explode immediately. It unraveled slowly, and honestly, that made it worse. My name is Claire Bennett. I was 31 when my grandfather passed away. At the time, my life was stable, ordinary in the best way. I worked as an environmental survey analyst, which basically meant I evaluated land usage projects for sustainability compliance. Not glamorous, but steady work I genuinely enjoyed. I lived 2 states away from my parents. We weren't distant emotionally, just geographically. Family gatherings were polite, predictable. My parents were practical people. My father believed in efficiency. My mother believed in avoiding conflict at all costs. Jason, my older brother, had always been the confident one. Charismatic, socially smooth, naturally trusted. Growing up, he handled conversations. I handled details. Grandpa was different from all of us. He owned a large ranch property, thousands of acres passed down through generations. But it wasn't just land. It was identity, he used to say. Land remembers who respects it. I visited whenever I could. Jason rarely did. My parents visited mostly during holidays. Still, I never imagined inheritance would become complicated. We weren't that kind of family. At least I thought we weren't. 6 months before he died, I sat with Grandpa on his porch watching the sun fall behind the hills. "You still working with land surveys?" he asked. "Yeah," he nodded approvingly. "Good. You understand what's underneath the surface." I laughed. "That sounds mysterious." He looked at me longer than usual. "People look at land and see dirt. Smart people look deeper." At the time, I thought he meant environmental science. Now I know he meant something else entirely. The first disturbance didn't happen at the lawyer's office. It happened at the funeral. Jason and my parents spent most of the reception whispering with strangers in suits I didn't recognize. Real estate people, investors. I overheard fragments. Closing already scheduled. Transfer finalized. Excellent timing. When I approached, conversations stopped instantly. Mom smiled too brightly. Oh, honey, just paperwork conversations, Jason added, boring adult stuff. I remember feeling mildly hurt, but not suspicious yet. Families handle estates differently. I told myself not to overthink it. But something shifted that day. A quiet exclusion, like decisions were moving ahead without me. Back in the present, I pushed the document away. I want clarification, I said calmly. The attorney hesitated. My father spoke first. There's nothing complicated. Then explain why the ranch was sold before the will reading. Jason sighed dramatically. Claire, don't make this difficult. That phrase landed heavier than expected. Not don't worry, not let's explain. Just don't make this difficult. Me, who authorized the sale? Attorney, the estate executors. Me, which are? Attorney glances at Dad. Dad, your mother and I, me, without informing me. Mom, we assumed you'd agree. Me, you assumed? Jason laughs softly. You live far away. You weren't going to manage a ranch. Me, that wasn't the question. Silence again. My internal alarm finally turned on. I flipped through the financial breakdown. Large numbers. Very large numbers. The ranch sold for significantly more than expected. Yet my allocated share was strangely small. Why isn't this divided equally? I asked. Mom's smile tightened. Well, Jason helped with Grandpa more toward the end. Jason nodded solemnly. Dad added, we felt fairness mattered. Fairness. My chest felt cold, because Grandpa's will had always emphasized equality between grandchildren. Always, internal thought this isn't Grandpa's decision. This is theirs. I stared at the signature page. If I signed, I accepted their version permanently. If I refused, I became the difficult daughter. I could already hear future conversations. Claire made inheritance ugly. Claire caused drama. Claire couldn't let things go. And that realization hurt more than the money. They were counting on my silence. My mother reached for my hand. Sweetheart, families shouldn't fight over money. Jason added quickly. It's already done anyway. Already done. That phrase repeated again, meaning you have no power here. The lawyer finally spoke carefully. You may request independent review if you prefer. Dad's jaw tightened. That's unnecessary. I looked at the attorney. Please send me copies of everything. Jason rolled his eyes. Seriously, I answered calmly. Yes, seriously. As we gathered our things, the attorney hesitated again. Miss Bennett, he said cautiously, there is one additional notation referenced in the will. My parents stiffened. Dad interrupted quickly. That's irrelevant. The attorney looked uncomfortable. It references a separate recorded asset. My heartbeat slowed. What asset? Mom stood abruptly. We'll discuss that later. Jason grabbed his coat. Meeting's over. They were rushing too fast. And suddenly I knew whatever they didn't want discussed mattered more than everything else. Me, I want to hear it now. Dad, Claire. Me now. The attorney opened another folder slowly. I'm obligated to disclose that Mr. Bennett assigned specific subsurface rights directly to Claire Bennett under a separate instrument. The words hung in the air. Subsurface rights? Jason frowned. What does that even mean? The lawyer answered carefully. Mineral rights. Silence. My parents exchanged a glance so fast most people wouldn't notice, but I did, and in that tiny shared look I saw panic. The attorney continued quietly. These rights were excluded from the ranch sale because they legally belong only to Claire. I blinked. What are they worth? He adjusted his glasses. We're still assessing valuation. Then he added, but preliminary estimates suggest several $1,000,000. Jason's chair scraped loudly against the floor. My mother went pale, and for the first time that entire day, I realized my family hadn't just excluded me. They had accidentally left me with the most valuable part of the inheritance. The word mineral rights changed the atmosphere in the room instantly. A minute earlier, my parents had been calm, organized, confident. Now my mother wouldn't look at me. Jason stopped smiling. My father spoke too quickly. That's not important, he said. The land is gone anyway. Not important. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably beside his desk. I wouldn't characterize it that way. The rain outside intensified, tapping harder against the windows, and I remember noticing how loud it sounded, like something pressing to get in. I sat very still, because suddenly the meeting wasn't about inheritance anymore. It was about something they hadn't planned for, something Grandpa had separated deliberately. I looked at the attorney. What exactly did my grandfather leave me? He hesitated, then said carefully, ownership of all subsurface mineral extraction rights attached to the Bennett Ranch property. Jason laughed nervously. Okay, but the ranch is sold. The lawyer shook his head. Yes, the surface land was sold. He paused, but the minerals beneath it were not. And that's when my father stood up. We're done here. Too fast, too final. Which told me everything I needed to know. 3 questions hit me at once. Why separate the mineral rights from the land? Why did Grandpa assign them only to me? And most importantly, why were my parents trying to leave before the discussion continued? If the asset was meaningless, they wouldn't be nervous. If it had no value, they wouldn't interrupt the lawyer. Something else was happening, something older than the will. And suddenly I remembered Grandpa's voice on the porch. Smart people look deeper. Before I go further, I want to ask you something. Have you ever realized, mid-conversation, that the people around you suddenly wanted the discussion to end? That moment when you know you accidentally stepped into the truth. And tell me where you're listening from tonight. If you haven't, please subscribe. It's free. Okay, let me tell you what happened next. Because that meeting didn't end the way my parents expected. I stayed seated. I'm not leaving, I said calmly. The attorney nodded slightly, relieved. My father exhaled sharply. Claire, this is unnecessary. I turned toward him. If it's unnecessary, then hearing it won't hurt. Jason muttered under his breath. This is turning into drama. I ignored him. The lawyer opened another folder labeled Supplemental Testamentary Directive. He spoke slowly. Your grandfather executed this document 8 months before his passing. 8 months. Around the same time, Grandpa started asking me questions about my job, about land surveys, about environmental assessments. My pulse quickened. Attorney, Mr. Bennett separated mineral rights intentionally. Me, why? Attorney. He expressed concern about potential resource discovery. Jason, resource, like rocks. Attorney, like natural gas and rare earth deposits. Silence hit the room again. My mother whispered, almost involuntarily, "Oh my God." My father shot her a warning look. Too late. The reaction confirmed it. They already suspected something. The attorney slid a thick document toward me. Your grandfather commissioned a private geological survey. I opened it. Charts, soil density data, seismic mapping, extraction probability models, professional signatures, estimated reserve zones highlighted in red. I didn't understand everything immediately, but one number stood out. Projected valuation, $5.7 million minimum. My breath caught. Jason leaned forward. Let me see that. I instinctively pulled the document closer. No, the word surprised even me, not aggressive, just firm. Because suddenly I understood why they rushed the ranch sale. They thought the value was only on the surface. Grandpa knew better, and he left the deeper value to me alone. My father sat back down slowly. His tone changed completely. Claire, we should discuss this as a family. That word again. Family. Now that something valuable belonged to me, Jason forced a laugh. Well, obviously we'd all share it. That's what Grandpa would have wanted. I met his eyes. You didn't think that when you sold the ranch. He flinched. Mom stepped in quickly. We didn't know about this. The attorney cleared his throat gently. For legal clarity, the Mineral Rights Registry was recorded publicly. Silence. My parents froze. They could have known. They just hadn't looked deeply enough. They moved fast. Too fast. They assumed I wouldn't question anything. And if I had signed earlier, I might never have discovered what Grandpa protected. I turned to my father. Why was the ranch sold so quickly? He hesitated. Jason answered instead. Market timing. The lawyer spoke quietly. There was a competing buyer negotiation before Mr. Bennett's passing. I looked up sharply. A buyer interested before Grandpa died? The attorney nodded. Yes, an energy development company. The room went silent again. My stomach dropped. They hadn't just sold land. They had sold land someone specifically wanted, without checking what lay underneath. Did you know about the energy company, Dad? They made an offer. Me, did you ask why? Jason, it was a good price. Me, did you investigate? Silence. Mom whispered. We trusted the appraisal. And in that moment, the emotional shift hit fully. They hadn't excluded me because they knew everything. They excluded me because they wanted control. Speed mattered more than fairness. The attorney handed me a handwritten letter. Your grandfather requested this be delivered if questions arose. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Grandpa's handwriting. Steady, familiar. Claire, you always asked what land remembers. Some people see property as money. You see responsibility. That's why this belongs to you. Don't let anyone rush you. Grandpa, I swallowed hard. He knew. He knew pressure would come. He knew exactly how my family operated. And he prepared me without ever saying it directly. I felt two emotions at once, grief and clarity. Grandpa hadn't favored me randomly. He trusted judgment, not proximity, not personality, judgment. And suddenly every conversation we'd ever had made sense. Jason leaned forward urgently. Okay, let's just reset. We all made decisions based on limited info. My father nodded. We'll renegotiate internally. Internally. Meaning. Redistribute what belonged to me. My mother squeezed my arm. We're family, we share blessings. I gently removed my arm from her grasp. You didn't share the sale proceeds. Silence answered. Jason, that's different. Me, how, Jason? We handled the work. Me, you handled excluding me. Dad, Claire, don't make this adversarial. Me, it became adversarial when decisions were made without me. The attorney stared at his notes, wisely silent. And this was the moment everything crystallized. The betrayal wasn't only about money, it was about narrative control. My family had quietly decided, Claire lives far away. Claire won't argue. Claire will accept whatever we give her. They didn't think they were villains. They thought they were efficient, practical, entitled. And when the situation reversed, they immediately expected generosity from me they had never shown first. That realization didn't make me angry. It made me calm, very calm. I closed Grandpa's letter carefully. I'd like independent legal representation, I said. My father frowned. That's unnecessary. I disagree. Jason sighed loudly. You're overcomplicating this. I stood. No, I'm slowing it down. The exact opposite of what they had done. For the first time since the meeting started, I felt fully in control. Not reactive, observant, strategic. As we left the office, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Claire Bennett. Yes. This is Laura Chen with Horizon Energy Development. My steps stopped. We recently acquired the Bennett Ranch property, she continued. We were hoping to speak with the mineral rights holder. My family froze around me. I realized they could hear every word. Miss Chen added, we'd like to discuss a potential lease agreement. Lease, not purchase, recurring income. Long-term control, I replied calmly. I'll have my attorney contact you. When I hung up, Jason stared at me. They already called you? Yes, Mom whispered. How much are they offering? I looked at her. And for the first time in my life, I didn't answer. Because at that moment, I understood something powerful. My family thought the inheritance story had ended when they sold Grandpa's ranch. But the real inheritance, the one Grandpa protected, had just begun. And the next family gathering would change our relationships permanently. 3 days after the lawyers' meeting, my mother invited me to dinner. Not asked. Invited. The message read, let's sit together as a family and move forward peacefully. Peacefully. I stared at my phone for a long time before replying yes. Because I already knew this wasn't dinner. It was negotiation. The house looked exactly the same when I arrived. Porch light glowing, wind chimes moving softly, the familiar smell of roast chicken drifting through the hallway. Normal, comforting. Strategic. Jason greeted me at the door with unusual enthusiasm. Hey, glad you came. Too warm, too careful. My father shook my hand instead of hugging me. My mother kept touching my arm like she was checking whether I might disappear. Every movement said the same thing. They were adjusting to a new reality. And that reality was me holding something they couldn't control. We sat at the dining table, plates arranged perfectly, wine poured already. No casual conversation, no small talk, just waiting. I noticed 3 folders sitting beside my father's chair, prepared documents. My internal thought was immediate. They planned this meeting. Jason broke the silence. So, we should probably talk about the mineral rights situation. Situation. Interesting word. Not discovery. Not blessing. Not grandpa's decision. A situation. I nodded calmly. Yes, let's talk. Before I continue, I want to ask you something. Have you ever walked into a family gathering knowing everyone had rehearsed what they wanted from you? Where kindness suddenly feels strategic. Tell me where you're watching from tonight. Stories like this remind me how many people recognize that moment when family dynamics quietly change. Okay, because what happened at that dinner changed how I understood my family forever. My father slid a folder toward me. We've drafted a fair redistribution plan. Redistribution. I opened it slowly. A proposed agreement transferring partial ownership of my mineral rights into a family trust. My name still listed, but diluted. Shared control. Jason leaned forward eagerly. This protects everyone long-term. Mom added softly, it keeps Grandpa's legacy united. United. The same legacy they sold without asking me. Me, why would ownership change? Dad. Because major assets affect the whole family. Me, the ranch affected the whole family too. Silence. Jason shifted uncomfortably. That was different timing. Me, it was different inclusion. Mom sighed. We didn't mean to hurt you. I studied their faces. They believed that, which somehow made it heavier. My father cleared his throat. We also spoke with a financial advisor. Another document appeared. Projected lifetime earnings from mineral leases. Royalty percentages. Passive income estimates. The number at the bottom made Jason whistle softly. Potential long-term revenue, $12.18 million over decades. This wasn't just a one-time asset. It was generational wealth. And suddenly I understood why tonight felt urgent. They hadn't just miscalculated. They realized too late that Grandpa's real inheritance wasn't land. It was time. I felt sadness more than anger. Because their behavior followed a pattern I'd ignored my entire life. Jason led decisions. My parents supported him. I adapted quietly. Not malicious, just familiar. And Grandpa had seen it clearly. He didn't punish anyone. He balanced something. Jason leaned closer. Look, Claire, we're not trying to take anything. We just think it should benefit all of us. I asked calmly. Did you think that when dividing the ranch money? He hesitated. Dad answered quickly. That's behind us. No, I said gently. It explains this moment. Mom's voice cracked slightly. We made a mistake. That was new, an admission. But it arrived only after value appeared. Dialogue sequence Jason. You're acting like we stole from you. Me, you made decisions without me. Jason, we assumed you trusted us. Me, trust requires participation. Dad, families shouldn't keep score. Me, families shouldn't exclude. The room fell quiet again. I placed my own folder on the table. Horizon Energy's preliminary lease offer. My parents leaned forward instantly. Jason read quickly. His eyebrows rose. They're offering signing bonuses already. Yes, Dad looked stunned. And annual royalties? Yes, Mom whispered. This changes everything. I nodded. It already did. As they studied the documents, a realization settled fully inside me. Grandpa didn't leave me the mineral rights because I needed money. He left them because I understood stewardship. My career focused on environmental impact, long-term consequences, sustainable use. Jason saw opportunity. My parents saw security. Grandpa saw responsibility. And suddenly I wasn't defending ownership anymore. I was honoring trust. I closed their proposal folder gently. I'm not transferring ownership. Jason's head snapped up. Seriously? Yes. Mom looked hurt. You won't share, I answered carefully. I will help family when I choose. But control stays with me. The distinction mattered. Choice instead of obligation. Dad exhaled slowly. You've changed. I smiled faintly. No, I stopped assuming my voice didn't matter. Something unexpected happened then. No one argued. No shouting. Just quiet understanding spreading across the table. Jason leaned back. You know, Grandpa always listened to you differently. Mom nodded slowly. He trusted your judgment. The social narrative rewrote itself right there. Not favoritism. Alignment. For the first time, they weren't negotiating against me. They were recognizing why Grandpa chose me. The room didn't soften after I refused to transfer ownership. It tightened. You know that moment when people realize persuasion didn't work and something darker replaces politeness? That's what happened at the table. The clinking of silverware stopped. My mother folded her napkins slowly, too carefully, like she needed time to reorganize her thoughts. Jason leaned back in his chair, studying me in a way he never had before. Not like a sister. Like an obstacle. My father cleared his throat. "Well," he said evenly, "I think we need to adjust how we're looking at this." Adjust. Not accept. Not understand. Adjust. I waited. Because suddenly I understood this conversation wasn't ending with an apology. It was moving into negotiation phase too. Then they started with the slow manipulation. Dad clasped his hands together. "Claire, I think you're interpreting things emotionally." There it was, the reframing. Make me emotional, invalidate my position. I stayed calm. "I'm interpreting documented decisions." Jason laughed lightly. "See, that tone right there, you're acting like we committed a crime." My mother jumped in quickly. "No one intended to exclude you." I tilted my head slightly. "You sold Grandpa's property without telling me." Mom nodded rapidly. "Yes, but we knew you wouldn't want the burden." The sentence landed quietly, carefully designed. They weren't wrong, they were protective. That was the narrative now. Me, "You didn't ask what I wanted." Dad, "Because we already understood your lifestyle." Me, "You assumed." Jason, "You moved away, Claire, you built your own life." "We handled what was local." Me, "Handling something doesn't mean owning the decision." Mom sighed dramatically. "I hate that this feels like blame." Internal thought, "Of course you hate blame, because blame requires responsibility." My mother's eyes filled with tears suddenly. It was so fast it almost impressed me. "We were grieving," she said softly. "Your grandfather had just died." Jason nodded solemnly. "Yeah, we were dealing with everything while you were working." "Working," said gently, but weighted heavily. I felt the implication. "We suffered more than you." I breathed slowly before answering. "I was grieving too." Mom reached across the table, grabbing my hand. "And we never questioned that." But she squeezed just a little too tight, not comfort, control. "Mom, families support each other, Claire." Me, "Support isn't the same as deciding for someone." Dad, "You're focusing on process instead of outcome." Me, "Process is respect." Jason leaned forward now, voice sharper. "So what? You want us to beg?" The room went silent. I hadn't asked for begging, I hadn't asked for anything. But that sentence revealed something important. To him, acknowledgement equaled humiliation. Dad exhaled heavily. "Let's be realistic," he said. "You're financially secure already." Jason nodded immediately. "You're doing fine." Mom added softly, "This money changes things for us more than for you." There it was, the pivot, not fairness, need. They weren't apologizing. They were repositioning me as selfish if I kept control. They're not admitting wrongdoing. They're negotiating access. Me, "So the argument is that I should give up ownership because you benefit more." Dad, "No one said give up." Jason, "Share, big difference." "Like you shared the ranch proceeds," I added. Jason's jaw tightened. "That's not the same situation." "Why?" Jason hesitated. Dad answered instead. "Because we acted responsibly." I stared at him. "You mean quickly?" He didn't respond, and silence became louder than any argument. Mom wiped her eyes. "I'm worried about you." I blinked. "Why? You're becoming guarded." Jason nodded. "Yeah. Grandpa dies and suddenly you're treating us like enemies." The shift was subtle but effective. Now the problem wasn't their actions. It was my reaction. Classic reversal. Me, "Setting boundaries isn't hostility." Dad, "It can feel that way." Me, "To people who benefited from having none." Jason laughed once, humorless. "So now we're villains." Me, "No, just accountable." That word hit harder than I expected. Accountable. Jason leaned forward, voice low. "You know what this sounds like? Like you think Grandpa loved you more." Ah, there it was. The real emotion finally surfacing. Not money. Comparison. Mom immediately shook her head. "No one is saying that." But her voice carried tension. Jason continued anyway. "You were always the favorite when it came to serious conversations." Dad added quietly. "He respected different qualities in each of you." Careful phrasing. Avoiding confirmation. Avoiding denial. I realized something then. They weren't just upset about losing money. They were confronting a truth they never wanted spoken aloud. Grandpa trusted my judgment, and that disrupted the family hierarchy they were used to. Jason pushed his chair back slightly. "You know what hurts," he said, "that you didn't immediately say, 'Let's figure this out together.'" I watched him carefully, because suddenly I was the one who failed a family expectation. Not them. Me. You didn't include me when there was something to divide. Jason, because we thought you trusted us. Me, trust isn't silent consent. Mom, you're punishing us. Me, I'm protecting what Grandpa entrusted to me. Dad's voice hardened. You're choosing money over family. That sentence landed like a stone, not loud, but deliberate, the ultimate emotional weapon. There it is. If I hold my boundary, I become the betrayer. Dad leaned forward. Think long-term. What happens when problems come? Illness, emergencies, families rely on shared resources. Jason added quickly, "What if one of us needs help someday?" Mom whispered. "We always assumed we'd take care of each other." I nodded slowly. "And you will, but help isn't ownership." Jason scoffed. "That's a technicality." "No," I said quietly. "That's consent." The temperature in the room felt warmer now, not comfortable warm, pressurized warm. Jason stood suddenly and began pacing. "This is unbelievable." Mom looked between us anxiously. "We're talking about family unity and you're talking legal definitions." I answered gently, "Because legal definitions are the only reason I still have this inheritance." No one spoke, because everyone knew it was true. Jason stopped pacing. "You really think Grandpa wanted division?" I held his gaze. "I think Grandpa wanted fairness." Dad shook his head slowly. "You're interpreting his intentions." I reached into my bag and placed Grandpa's letter on the table. Silence returned. Mom picked it up carefully. Her eyes moved across the page. Her expression changed. Not anger, recognition. She handed it to Dad without speaking. Jason read it last. No one argued with the handwriting. No one questioned authenticity. The room finally faced something undeniable. Grandpa had chosen intentionally. Instead of apologizing, Dad exhaled deeply. "Well, that explains his reasoning." "Explains, not admits fault." Jason nodded reluctantly. "Okay, fine. He trusted you," Mom added softly. "That doesn't mean we were wrong." I almost smiled. Even confronted with evidence, they couldn't fully surrender their narrative. Dad folded his hands. "Fine, we accept your decision." A pause. Then he added, "But understand this changes things." There it was, not anger, consequence framing. If I kept control, relationships might suffer, an emotional invoice. Jason sat back down. "I guess we know where everyone stands now." Mom looked genuinely sad. "I just hope money doesn't come between us." The irony almost hurt. Because money hadn't come between us, secrecy had. I spoke slowly. "I didn't create distance tonight." They watched me carefully. "I didn't sell anything without you. I didn't divide assets privately. I didn't assume your consent." Silence, not defensive now, just heavy. "I'm not rejecting family," I continued. "I'm rejecting the idea that family means surrendering agency." No one argued, because for the first time there was nothing left to manipulate. Something subtle changed, not reconciliation, not closure, recognition. My parents realized persuasion wouldn't work. Jason realized pressure wouldn't work. And I realized something equally important. They might never fully apologize. Some families don't. They adapt instead. Mom finally said quietly, "We'll need time." I nodded. "So will I. No hugs, no dramatic forgiveness. Just an uneasy truce forming in real time." And as I stood to leave, I understood the real turning point of the night. They hadn't admitted wrongdoing, but they had stopped trying to control the outcome. And sometimes, with family, that's the closest thing to an apology you ever get. Dinner ended quietly. No contracts signed, no dramatic exit. Just a shift. Over the next months, my parents stopped making financial decisions without asking me. They did what I asked them to. Jason treated me like an equal partner for the first time. Conversations became slower, more transparent. The dynamic changed, not perfectly, but permanently. I signed a carefully negotiated mineral lease, environmental protections included. Community revenue contributions built into the contract. Steady royalties began arriving. Life didn't suddenly become luxurious, but it became peaceful. I paid off my student loans, reduced work hours, started funding conservation projects Grandpa would have loved. Sometimes I visited the ranch land again. The surface belonged to someone else now, but standing there, I knew something deeper still carried his name. People assume inheritance stories are about money. For me, it became about voice. For years, I accepted decisions made around me. Grandpa's final gift wasn't millions. It was proof that being quiet doesn't mean being powerless. Sometimes the most valuable things aren't visible at first glance. Just like land, just like trust, you have to look beneath the surface. Now I want to hear from you. If your family had sold an inheritance without telling you, would you have shared the surprise asset afterward? Was my family wrong, or were they just human? And honestly, what would you have done in my place? Tell me below. I read every comment, and stories like yours often become the next one we tell. Subscribe for more, and thanks for watching.